Have you ever had one of those moments where life holds up a mirror and you don't really like what you see? That happened to me this week. I went to a shamanic healing session, and what came through wasn't what I expected. It was uncomfortable and confronting, but also exactly what I needed to hear. I want to share it with you because maybe you've had those moments too where everything looks fine on the outside, but inside you know something isn't lining up. This is definitely different from anything I have ever experienced before, so strap in for a journey into the unknown. Let's cue the reel. So before I get into the details, let me back up for a second. If you're not familiar with shamanic healing, it's a partially guided spiritual journey. It isn't like hypnosis where it's just you and you're being led by someone the whole time who is asking questions and essentially holding your hand through the journey. In a shamanic healing, the healer leads you into a meditative state so you can begin your own journey inward. They start by doing a spiritual practice from indigenous traditions, particularly Native American culture and paganism, called calling in the directions, where they face each cardinal direction and invoke their associated spiritual energies. They essentially just call them in. And after you're in that state, the deep meditative state, they go on their own journey with you. And to do this, my practitioner or healer did breath work and played drums on the speakers for us to listen to. And then she recorded everything she saw, felt, and heard on her journey, and then afterwards shared it back with me. It's not therapy in the traditional sense, but it works on those deeper layers that sometimes words can't reach. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Lindsay Brand, and this is Cue the Real, a podcast about the real side of manifestation, not just the shiny parts, but the messy, confusing, in-between places where you're trying to line up with the life that you want, even if it feels like everything's falling apart in the process. All right, so with that said, let me take you into the journey my healer had for me. In her journey, she found me holding a baby on my left arm. At first, she thought it must have been my own daughter, full of energy, babbling and bouncing, waving her arms around, trying to get attention. But then the scene shifted and the healer explained that this wasn't my daughter at all. This was actually me. It was me as a baby. And in the vision, that baby, my inner child, was smiling and moving, but then she started to cry and she was left alone. And the healer told me this part of you still needs attention. If you don't give it to her, she's going to keep acting out. And I'll be honest, that hit me pretty hard because since having kids of my own, so much of my attention and nurturing goes outward to them and to my family. And it's so easy to forget that there's a young part of me still waiting to be cared for too. Anyway, in the vision, I walked down a long tunnel to go pick her up again, to hold her and to bring her back into my arms. That image has stayed with me because it feels true. There's a little version of me who's still waiting to be held, especially now that I'm a mother myself. And I've been feeling this struggle for the last few months. Ever since having kids, there's been less room for me, less room for my own needs, my own tenderness, my own care. And I pour so much love out, and I want to. But sometimes I notice how empty I feel when I don't give any of that love back to myself. So when the healer showed me that baby crying, that version of me, it made sense because that's exactly how I've been feeling. Like a part of me is calling out for attention and I haven't been answering. And then the scene shifted. The image of me holding the baby faded away, and suddenly she saw me standing in front of a mirror. In the vision, she said I looked completely depressed by what I saw staring back at me. It wasn't a normal reflection. It was like these fragments or broken pieces of different parts of my life, almost like a puzzle that had been scattered across the floor. The healer asked me in the vision what was happening, and I said, those are all the things I thought I wanted, and now they don't fit anymore. That's not what I want, and I feel stuck. But the message that came back wasn't that I was stuck. It was that I was misaligned with myself, with who I really am, with what I actually want to experience in this life. And then the reflection in the mirror changed again, and suddenly there were two versions of me standing side by side, and the healer said, you're not stuck. You're just in a really uncomfortable place. You're scared of what it might mean if you admitted everything you're truly feeling and everything you'd want if you were completely free. After that, the healer turned the focus toward my work. She said, you want to teach others what you're trying to still do for yourself. And at first that stung a little bit, but then I realized that's the whole point. People don't need another perfect voice telling them what to do. They don't need another guru, someone who's mastered every step. What they actually connect with is someone who's right in front of them, someone asking the same hard questions, stumbling and figuring things out one day at a time. And that's when it hit me that my role here isn't to show up as the expert with all the answers all the time, that maybe my role is to be more open about the searching, the misalignment, the moments where I feel like I'm in the dark too. And I've alluded to this a few times, but not really gone down the rabbit hole of specifics. So hearing all that made me pause. I realize how often I put pressure on myself to have all the answers, to have it all figured out before I can even share anything with anyone. And honestly, that pressure sometimes keeps me from showing up in ways that I need to. So sitting with the healer's words, I felt a shift. And I figured out that it was her giving me permission to be messy, to be searching, to admit that I don't know, permission to not be perfect. And even in her vision, I was told that there are so many things that I still don't know. And let's shift to the journey that I experienced, which was much different. I was surrounded by a ring of people holding hands around me. And I went up to each of them and they told me things. I met my ego. I met my confidence. I met myself as a young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old. I ended up hugging her and holding her for a while. I met my anxiety and many other people or energies. And at one point, I started to feel really overwhelmed, and they all started chanting in unison, "You are loved, you are loved, you are loved." And it felt incredibly warm and loving and amazing. And I was on the journey for about an hour and a half, and it felt like 20 minutes max. Time didn't really feel like it existed there. Occasionally, I would come back to reality like halfway because I needed to pee desperately. My body was screaming at me to get up and go, but I didn't want to break away from these energies that I was talking to. So I quieted my body and told it would be okay, and eventually got over it. These journeys that we both had pointed to the fact that I had some work to do on myself, specifically my inner child, as my inner child showed up in both of our journeys and seemingly needed help and comfort. And this experience made me think about this podcast as well, about the conversations we have here, the questions that I ask, the experiences I share. Maybe my most valuable lessons for you all aren't just about the things I've mastered and want to help you master, but the stuff I'm still figuring out, the stuff that's raw and uncomfortable. So here's where I leave it today. I'm sitting in that discomfort. I'm holding both the struggle and the desire for growth. And you can be doubtful and simultaneously pursue the thing that feels right in that moment. But I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay with that. What I do have is curiosity, awareness, and a willingness to show up, even when life feels chaotic. And that's really what I want to leave with you, the permission to sit in your own questions, to notice the parts of yourself that are calling for your attention that feel unseen or don't quite fit into the puzzle of your life right now. What part of you is still waiting to be held? What questions are you afraid to answer about your own path? I want to invite you to sit with those questions alongside me while I sit with mine, because sometimes the real work, the stuff that changes us and the world around us, starts not when we have clarity, but when we have the courage to be present with the unknown. And if you take one thing away from today, let it be this. The parts of you that feel small, lost, or forgotten are not broken. They're waiting for you to show up and listen. Go hold them.